Hey YouTube, warbles not a lot here. There have been some developments regarding the Burilda boar. Quite interesting developments, so let's go and have a look. So, to break up the saga of the Chinesium hoses, of which there will be more, let us take up the story of the Burilda boar, which at this point is getting to be, well, a little bit of a boo hooray story. A story full of ups and downs and pauses and waits and delays and good news and bad news. And the good news is the Burilda solar powered bore project has been and is moving ahead. So soon I'll be able to do this sort of thing with bore water instead of with dam water, as I showed in last night's video. So that's goodly, very goodly. And if it was the chlorine that was annoying these, it's being washed out. Last night, or actually this morning at dawn, we actually got 1/2 millimetre. 1/2 millimetre being 2/100ths of an inch, which works out to being 2 tonnes per acre. So yeah, 200 tonnes air dropped on top of the maybe 1/2 a tonne that I put out last night through the sprinkler while walking down the hill, switching off the pump that had just filled the dam, and taught me a few things about rainfall and runoff and storage, things I'd never really had to think about before. And I listed those things regarding micro hydrology and landscape in the clip description of the previous video. The purpose of coming out here is to put this onto this before we come on down the hill and have a look at this. So off we go. As well as a price on water, when my neighbour was connecting this up, backfilling its little trench, we agreed on what sort of fitting he would permit me to buy and install, so that I didn't go and buy something that wouldn't fit his pumps and equipment that might one day want to use this particular valve off the tank. Great big 50mm nylon ball. So first a check fit, and indeed it does. And then we have the choice of tapes. Whoever put these fittings on, clearly they used white Teflon tape, which tells you what standard it complies with. Working pressure 2.6 MPa and a temperature -20 to +250. So it'll do the job, yes. This stuff, high density pink plumber's tape, I think it's Kevlar versus Teflon. It's a listed seal material and it gives you a specification. All I can say is that in my experience, the pink tape is stronger, so I'm going to use the pink. Also, the irrigation warehouse gives away 1 or 2 free rolls of pink tape every time you go in and buy a chunk of stuff. Because not only do I like it, I got lots of it, and it works better than the white stuff. Why not use the best you got when you got plenty of it? So I roll that on and I put a thicker layer of it at the end of the thread than I do at the start of the thread. So it gets tighter the further you go in. Thus, and of course you take care to wind it on so that as you tighten it up inside the female thread, that tightens the tape. And then out comes the ancestral Stilsons, which I had slightly over tightened, but they come off easy enough. And then reapply. Try that again. Come up. So the tie wire locking lug or the chain lug is on the top. Right. Now what I've got to do is go back to the irrigation warehouse and get a cam lock blanking cap to stop the wasps from going in there and building nests and introducing dust and dirt and grit and shit which would otherwise have a terrible effect on the ball. I wonder what people do if they haven't got themselves an ancestral drop forged steel set of Stilsons with which to work on such choice little jobs. Okay, so that's my contribution to the Burilda boar project, and I think it's about $3.84. However, there's about $280 worth of other stuff to connect onto that $3.84 before I can actually get water from that tank to go into my prism framed pool. Costs money to move water around, and because I've made such a tiny infinitesimal contribution to the infrastructure to deliver it into the tank, therefore I'm happy to pay $50 for every 12 tonnes of it that he's got to spare. That, I think, is how capitalism works. He had more access to the produced means of production, i.e. money, to outlay than I did. Well, perhaps even I would have thought about digging a bore eventually, if it had occurred to me. Now over there is the top end of the 50mm poly pipe with its electrical cable and its control cables and its steel restraint cable, which runs down to the bottom of the bore, which I think is 93 metres whole, and there's probably a 90-metre cable, or maybe the pump goes right to the bottom, I don't know. Sadly, yesterday when I heard four-wheel drive vehicle towing trailer plus quad bike noises, I thought they were doing something with the cattle, which have been over there in that paddock. What they were doing was using grappling hooks and chains to use a quad bike, a pretty big one, you know, Polaris-y looking thing, 2 seats side by side on a four-wheel drive overgrown quad bike. And they had a trailer with a round hay bale and black plastic over the top of the round hay bale, and they had this coming up straight out of the bore over the hay bale, and he was pulling it up the hill with the quad bike. And this is obviously the track that he dragged it, and this is all to get the pump out of the ground, out of the well. And as I think I said, there's the steel restraining cable. there's a little electrical cable, and there's a big electrical cable, and there's the poly pipe. And it was all cable tied carefully together. And the little electrical cable runs to a float switch. And kind of perfect timing. There's all the extra big dig and scratch and gouging marks where the bottom end of the pipe with the pump on it got stuck in the hole. And old mate had to tractor very hard in his four-wheel drive motorbike to get it to come up and out of the hole. So he got just a bit past that tree and ploughed the ground for a while, and then give it the full throttle major turbocharged herbs, or what passes for that on a quad bike. And this all popped up out of the ground, thus releasing the quad bike to race up to the top of the driveway. And this stuff all literally, apparently I didn't see it, flew over the top of the trailer with the round hay bale. Kind of like pop, and then plopped down onto the ground, giving us a marvellous opportunity to check out the 11-stage hybrid AC/DC electric pump. So clearly the bottom bit is the motor. I've counted those segments a couple of times, and there's 19 that are identical. In there you can see the 11th rotary vane, and you can just sort of almost see the shaped donutty cone that feeds water to the centre of it underneath it. Perhaps if you can't see it, well, trust me, because I can. You can also see the snapped off fitting that went from the pump onto the end of the poly pipe when it finally emerged out the top. And what you would have had there for a brief period in time was the pump halfway out of the top of the hole, connected to the poly pipe, pulling straight up the hill, and it was that connector on top of the pump that let go. At which point that tether cable continued to drag the pump out of the ground and up the hill. Probably because it's not bent up the hill rather than out of the ground. It's continued to vertically levitate purely on inertia. So by guess I'm going to say that there's an impeller there, and that's a flow reverser, and there's an impeller and that's a flow reverser, and there's an impeller and that's a flow reverser, all the way up. Here's its data plate engraved onto it. Rated flow 33 litres a minute, rated head 140 metres, maximum 90 litres a minute, 176 metres, 18 kilogram diameter, rotates that way. IP times 8, I'm going to say that's internal impellers, so it's not 11 stage, it's 8. And it turns at about 2,800 RPM. So said the Sparky, who diagnosed that it was Cactus. When I was going to town yesterday, they told me that this was what hooked it up, and this, with this little float, is supposed to be set up like that, probably something like that far above the top of the pump. And when the water level drops below the level of here, this little float drops down, and that sends a signal up this wire, and that little sensor talks to this inspirational box. If there is the sun, there is the way, the 4th generation AC/DC hybrid power solar pump, and it switches it off. And in hindsight, old mate says he probably should have taped this straight on, and then it wouldn't have caught against a lip in the PVC bore casing, and thus hooked the whole bloody thing up and caused it to do its leaping out of the air performance. And according to the electrician who I was talking to when he came out to diagnose that the pump was Cactus, at the bottom of the hole in that pump casing there are computers and smart sorts of electronics, as well as what's in the optimistic propaganda box. So therefore he couldn't actually test the pump motor from up here on top with a multimeter. He said he's pretty sure the pump's dead in the box because he's getting no signals out of it at all. So there's a short circuit somewhere. Not in the sending line, not in the float line. There's a short circuit in the motor itself. So therefore there's a new pump on the way. The old one has been pulled out and left in the paddock, presumably for the electrician to collect and send back to the supplier. I've got my male cam lock fitting on the tank, and when water arrives, then I'll be able to put water in my tanks from this setup. 3 horsepower pump, 6 280 watt 32 volt panels. So there's nearly 200 volts of DC over there. There's about 1.68 kilowatts of current at your nearly 200 volts. And at 746 watts to the horsepower, it's about 2.15 horsepower, which is a bit better than 2/3 of 3 horsepower. There's something I didn't see, 500 to 3,600 RPM. So 3,600 RPM, that's when you get your 90 litres a minute at 176 metres. And 500 RPM, that's going to give you 33 litres a minute at 140 metres. That's kind of like my guess. That's with 3 horsepower going into it for the high reading. And this thing's got 2.15, so at 500 RPM, 2/3 of 140. It's a 93 metre hole. There's about 10 metres of hill, 2.5 or 3 metres to get it up to the top of the tank. So it's really only got to lift the water about 106 metres. So I would suspect that in theory, pretty much in summer, once the sun gets that high in the morning, this thing will start getting its 500 RPM and it'll start delivering its 33 litres a minute. In autumn, spring and winter, those 2 trees would have got in the way of the solar panels, which is why old mate cut them down. And you're going to still be pumping probably in the west. Yeah, you pretty much got 10 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We'll lay that, let's call it 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, and that would be your winter arc, whereas that would be your summer arc. So 10 o'clock till 2 o'clock in winter, and 9 till 3, maybe even 8:30 till 3:30 in the afternoon in summer. So if it's a bright sunny day with maybe 30% cloud in summer at midday, and the cloud goes over the top of the panels, and a wind blows away all their excess heat, so they're brought right down to as cold as they can get, and then the cloud goes away, and while they're cooled down, they have a spurt of current output. You might actually see 100 litres a minute going up and into the top tank. But I'd say once they heat up, maximum that thing will probably push up the hill would be 80 litres a minute, perhaps. And it's pushing about as much water, although admittedly it's raising it 10 times further, but it's pushing about as much water as me Chong Quin Lee Fan Chinese firefighting pump that cost $500. That's why you really got to be an established pastoralist, a grazier or something like that, to move up to the scale of this with renewable energy. Here I am, the greenie, the hillbilly, and I'm using a petrol pump. My next door neighbour, the grazier, and he's got a solar powered bore, and I'm buying water off him. So what does that say for whose behaviour tells most about where they get their energy? I'm burning petrol to push water up a hill. Old mate is using the sunshine. And the reason it's taken so long is because he's busy carting water to his stock and he hasn't quite run out of water yet. So anyway, the explainification for this otherwise mysterious circle of rough-hewn concrete is not that he wants me to build him a sundial. Rather, he's got a circular drinking trough for the moo cows. I don't know whether a bar lamb would be able to drink from that. But anyway, it's for the moo cows. And apparently, the reason why a 600 litre moo cow drinking trough requires quite such a substantial pad is because when you order a load of concrete to be brought 15 k's out of town to mass balance and stabilise the foundations of the solar panels, as well as to concretise the top of the head pipe on the pump. It's a bit like the basalt chips that come up when you're drilling. It's got to be either thrown on the ground because nobody's got any use for it. This is the extras, what's left over, the leavings, tailings, as they say in the mining trade. Well, this is the suitably impressive tailings dump for the excess concrete, turned into an improvised pad for a 600 litre moo cow drinking trough. And perhaps in 150 or 500,000 years, when the swamp wallabies have evolved to become archaeologists, one of them will look down at that and say, look, see, there goes the track of one of the humans. Species who made such a startling difference to the way everything works. Just ask Greta Thunberg. And everybody else who realises that renewables is the way to go, it's the future, it's the way ahead. Burning fossils, really for cheapskate dumbass hillbillies who can't afford to do a proper job. Says the man with 2 water pumps running on petrol. As they say in the classics, each to their own, but I would like a pup out of that thing. And of course, at some indeterminate point in the future, should I come up to becoming flush enough with cash, no reason why I can't buy a solar panel and an electric pump and stick it on the existing poly pipe and only use the petrol pump at the dam for firefighting emergencies. Or to sprinkle. Pretty sure the electric pump won't sprinkle. Not the sort of one that I can afford to buy. What have I forgot? My grandfather's Stilsons. How could I forget that? Does it mean that I've got a hopeless forgettery? Try again to walk up the hill. Or does it mean that when composing a video using the oldie-fashioned shoot in sequence edit in camera technique, you're actually concentrating more about how far you are into the video, what you've already said, what you want to remember to say, how to sew the bloody thing all together, what's going on with your light angles. Here's the lens clean. Had to clean the damn thing twice while I was putting that cam lock on. And yeah, it's pretty easy to forget the Stilsons. At least that's my excuse. Now there's another thing I forgot to do. While concentrating on making a video for you, Warbles on a lot to YouTube, the Burilda Boar Project update. Like I said, bit of a boo hooray episode, but it is moving ahead. Ciao.